Imagine a world just completely turned upside down. Empires are crumbling, new powers are rising from the dust, and in that chaotic aftermath, totally surprising new movements start to emerge.
Yeah.
And these aren't just, political uprisings. They're led by figures claiming actual divine connections, promising a literal paradise on earth.
It sounds like something out of an epic fantasy, really.
It absolutely does, but this is deeply rooted in, well, very real history. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating, often overlooked world of early Islamic Iran. We're focusing on what scholars often call the nativist prophets and the rebellions they led, challenging the new Arab order that had just swept across the old Sasanian Empire.
And we're pulling from a really rich stack of sources for this deep dive, aren't we? Everything from, like, rigorous scholarly analyses to ancient historical chronicles and even some pretty fascinating archaeological findings.
That's right. Our goal here is to really peel back the layers on these incredibly complex revolts, understand the wild, often surprising beliefs that powered them, things like divine incarnation, reincarnation, even some truly unusual marital practices.
Yeah, some really challenging stuff for us to understand now.
Definitely. And then critically, see how these ancient Iranian ideas might still ripple through religious thought today.
Because these movements, often just dismissed as, mere heresies by later chroniclers, were actually profound organic responses to a world utterly transformed.
Right.
They represent a remarkable, if pretty turbulent moment of cultural and religious evolution.
Okay, so to really grasp these profound shifts, we have to rewind a bit and set the scene. The dramatic, almost unimaginable collapse of the Sasanian Empire. It began with that swift Arab conquest, particularly the fall of its magnificent capital, Ctesiphon, what the Arabs called 𝙀𝙧𝙤𝙀𝙀.
Yeah.
That single event effectively, well, decapitated the entire Sasanian Empire, didn't it? Leading to its rapid dissolution.
It's quite striking when you look at the geography. If the Sasanian capital had been tucked away in a mountainous stronghold, like, say, Ray or Nishapur.
Right, like Constantinople for the Byzantines.
Exactly. Similar idea. The Arabs would have faced immense difficulty making permanent inroads. The Persian plateau, much like Anatolia, was harsh, really inhospitable to them in winter.
Okay.
But by conquering Ctesiphon first, right there on the plains, they truly severed the head of the empire. It made any coordinated Sasanian resistance virtually impossible afterwards.
And what followed was just a dramatic shift for millions of Iranians, huge numbers taken as slaves and freedmen. We're talking immense figures here. Greek inscriptions from just two Cyprus invasions in the 650s claim 120,000 and 50,000 captives, respectively.
Staggering numbers.
When you hear numbers like that, it's easy to just kind of lose the human scale.
Yeah.
Can you maybe paint a picture for us? What would that have truly meant for a region? It's almost unimaginable, the sheer uprooting of lives and cultures.
It's truly staggering.
Yeah.
Imagine entire populations of cities just displaced. And while many were captives, it's important to remember that some free Iranians also made the choice to convert and join the new Muslim society.
Okay.
And this wasn't just common folk. It included parts of the old elite, like cavalry troops, alongside ordinary peasants and villagers. This started forging a completely new social dynamic within this emerging empire.
And this widespread conversion, which you'd think was a great success for the new faith, paradoxically created a massive fiscal problem for the new rulers.
Right.
Can you walk us through the mechanics of that? How did the very successive Islam spread inadvertently threaten the empire's economic foundations?
Absolutely. The Arab Empire's tax system, it was built on a fundamental assumption. Non-Arabs were non-Muslims, and therefore they paid the taxes, specifically the land tax and the poll tax.
Gotcha.
The moment peasants, who are the backbone of the agricultural economy, started converting to Islam and, crucially, moving into the Arab garrison cities to gain status, often hoping to join the army.
Right. Better prospects there.
The entire financial structure began to wobble. If everyone converted and moved, the tax base that funded the whole caliphate would simply collapse.
And that fiscal pressure, then, must have just rippled through the entire social fabric, because the Arab community, initially tiny, actually grew enormously by drawing in masses of these lower-status non-Arabs.
Precisely. And this led to an extraordinary revolution within Arab society itself. These native converts, the Mawali, who were initially considered inferior to Arabs, they weren't just joining the empire, they were becoming the main bearers and interpreters of the new belief system. It was almost a fulfillment of earlier prophecies that lowly and ignoble people would rise to high status.
Wow.
and often at the expense of both the Umayyad rulers and the old Iranian aristocracies.
So the outcome wasn't Iran suddenly getting its independence back.
No.
It was a profound transformation of the conquerors themselves. This isn't just a political footnote. It's a really profound insight into how new empires often absorb and transform rather than simply replace the cultures they conquer. It meant that for Iranians, joining the Arab identity wasn't necessarily just submission, but it was a path to becoming a central player in this new world order.
Indeed. It really blurred the lines between conqueror and conquered in pretty unprecedented ways for the time.
Which brings us neatly to the nature of these revolts. Scholars often describe them as pre-political uprisings. When we say that, we're not talking about movements striving for, like, a modern nation-state with defined borders and political programs.
Well, not at all. They were rooted in rural communities and often just aimed for a sort of nebulous good old days after kicking out the immediate invaders. Very localized, often.
And critically, these movements always took a religious form.
Always. In that era, religion was literally the only available source for any kind of large-scale organization beyond, say, the family or the village.
Right.
It legitimized new leadership, it provided shared concepts to articulate grievances, and it offered that crucial prophetic assurance that a redeemer figure would come, bring about an apocalyptic reversal, and create a literal paradise on earth.
Okay, so this raises an important question, though. Why wasn't Islam simply rejected outright? You know, like European colonial powers often were in other parts of the world centuries later. What was different here?
That's a fascinating point because early Islam uniquely fused religious and political community. Conversion meant that defeated natives, these mawali or clients,
The non-Arab converts.
right, the non-Arab converts,
Yeah.
they could actually join the ranks of the imperial elite. They weren't permanently second-class citizens.
Wow.
They could potentially, through things like religious scholarship or military service, rise to positions of real influence within the very empire that had conquered them. They could, in a sense, beat the Arabs at religion,
Whoa.
which allowed them to become Arabs in the sense of professing Islam, speaking Arabic, and belonging to the caliphate's political structure.
So no decolonization like we think of it now.
Exactly, but instead a kind of revolution in the religious understanding of the world and who belonged to the ruling community.
Okay, let's talk about some of the fascinating figures who led these rebellions. We can't really discuss this period without mentioning Sunbad, often called the Avenger of Abu Muslim.
Yes, Sunbad. An early figure rebelled soon after the murder of Abu Muslim, who himself was, a key architect of the Abbasid revolution. So lots of political intrigue there.
And the sources tend to inflate his importance later on.
They do, yeah, as often happens. Later chronicles claim he conquered everything from Nishapur to Ray, which is probably a huge exaggeration.
Okay.
But what's truly intriguing are the beliefs of his followers. They insisted Abu Muslim hadn't actually died.
Really?
Yeah, they believed he'd turn into a white dove by reciting God's greatest name, and they were just waiting for his return.
Wow, okay. A classic messianic expectation right there.
Absolutely.
So beyond these broader movements, what about the personalities at their heart? I'm particularly intrigued by Al-Muqanaq, the veiled prophet.
Muqanaq.
What made his claims so audacious? And how did someone like Hashim B. Hakim, who was basically a former soldier secretary, manage to command such devotion in Sogdia, of all places?
Al-Muqanaq's claims were, well, truly extraordinary. He asserted he was a divine being, an incarnation of God's spirit.
Okay, going beyond just being a prophet then.
Way beyond. He claimed he previously appeared as Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and, significantly, Abu Muslim.
Right, linking himself to that recent figure.
Exactly. And he claimed he returned to his heavenly throne between each incarnation. He famously veiled his face,
The veiled prophet.
claiming it was to shield his followers from his divine radiance. A clear, almost theatrical parallel to Moses on Sinai,
Definitely theatrical. And his message, potent stuff, I imagine.
Hugely potent. Vengeance against the tyrants, specifically the killers of Abu Muslim, and the inauguration of paradisiacal bliss right here on earth.
And showing his face was supposed to be the climax.
Yes, the moment when all restraints would be abolished, making the lives, possessions, even the children of non-believers lawful for his followers. Pretty radical.
And we also see symbolic colors becoming incredibly important around this time.
Very much so. Al-Muqanaq's followers were the white-clothed ones, and other colors, like red and black, became associated with different factions, powerful signs of dissent or loyalty in this really turbulent era.
Okay, another powerful figure, Buyback, the avenging guide of Azerbaijan.
Yes, Babek. His revolt took place in a different context. Aggressive Arab colonization meeting this violent, almost lawless frontier society in Azerbaijan.
Right.
Power there was intensely personal. It rested on controlling castles, local allegiances, not like the settled heartlands.
And his message was quite direct, wasn't it?
Very direct. He called himself the avenging guide and apparently contemptuously referred to Muslims as Jews, seeing the conquerors as the root of all his followers' troubles.
But here's a twist, right? His main enemies weren't always the Arab conquerors.
That's the crucial detail that really complicates the narrative. As the conflict dragged on, his primary opponents increasingly became other Iranians who had adopted Islam.
Yeah.
It highlights the complex, shifting loyalties. The lines between us and them were really blurry, not always clear-cut ethnic or religious divides.
And beyond these major figures, the landscape was just dotted with many other prophetic voices, right?
Absolutely. Figures like 𝙀𝙀𝙀, who emerged a generation earlier, interestingly, advocating for new Persian prayers, quite a different, more sort of cultural nativist response compared to the militant revolt.
Showing the diversity of reactions.
Exactly. And many of these figures, including 𝙀𝙀𝙀, who we mentioned, were later kind of absorbed into the broader Karami narratives. Their stories evolved, becoming part of these larger movements.
Okay, so let's dive into the core beliefs that really underpin these movements. Because this is where we see some truly ancient Iranian ideas bubbling back up to the surface.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. One central idea was hulu, divine indwelling. This was the profound belief that God's spirit could periodically manifest or, well, indwell in human beings. Al-Muqanak, for example, took this even further. He claimed a fuller divinity than his predecessors, believing he was, entirely filled with God's spirit.
So not just a messenger, but the message itself, in a way.
In a very real way, yes. And this concept of divine manifestation is deeply intertwined with Tanasuk, or Raja, reincarnation.
Right. The idea that spirits move between bodies.
Exactly. The belief that human spirits could pass into different bodies, even literally animals, for punishment or reward. Essentially, human life never truly ended. It just operated within this eternal world of continuous cycles.
And this also sheds light on some really surprising justifications for violence, like with Mazdak.
It does. Mazdak's alleged rationale for killing sinners. It's startling. He apparently believed it was an act of mercy.
Mercy? How?
By releasing their souls for a better reincarnation, preventing them from accumulating more sort of karmic debt in that life. It completely flips our modern understanding of mercy on its head, doesn't it?
It really does. Violence as a path to salvation, in a weird way.
In a very specific reincarnation-focused way, yes.
Their cosmology and eschatology were also incredibly rich, you mentioned.
Very rich. They believed in a pre-eternal creator, God, conceived as pure light. From this light, shadowy lights emerged, which then became spirits and bodies, ultimately forming the world.
And these vast cycles of time.
Huge cycles, far grander than typical Abrahamic traditions. For instance, some believed a single divine day lasted 50,000 years.
Wow.
Meaning a world week of creation would span 350,000 years. This ties into this idea of the world being eternal, never really perishing, just continually cycling through these vast cosmic ages.
Okay, and what about their ethos?
Yeah.
Their organization, the name itself, Quram Din, means joyful religion.
Yeah, that name is very telling. It immediately suggests a high regard for life's pleasures, which is quite a stark contrast to the more ascetic interpretations of religion that often come to mind for this period.
So their practices reflected this joyfulness.
They did seem to. They were known to permit wine drinking, eating blood and pork, though maybe with certain conditions on the pork, and they enjoyed music. This really shows a distinct break from what would become mainstream Islamic practice later on. It emphasizes a different path to spiritual fulfillment.
And their nonviolence was
Conditional.
conditional, yes. They believed in not harming living beings or shedding blood except during revolts or against perceived opponents. Again, this ties back to reincarnation.
Right, saving sinners from themselves.
Exactly, saving them from accumulating further karmic debts. So, ironically, violence could be framed as an act of mercy, ensuring a better rebirth for the victim.
It's challenging logic.
It is.
Yeah.
Furthermore, they challenged many core religious norms we might just take for granted. They often rejected ritual prayer, fasting, pilgrimage, ritual ablution.
The standard pillars.
Pretty much. They viewed them as unnecessary because in their belief system, God didn't need them. Truth was found elsewhere, perhaps in, inner spiritual experience or following the divine guide. Okay, let's address one of the most persistent and, frankly, often sensationalized accusations leveled against these groups: wife sharing. 𝙃𝙃.
Ah, yes, the 𝙃𝙃 charge.
This charge was widespread against the Karamis and other sectarian groups, usually presented in really stereotypical polemical terms by their enemies.
Absolutely. It's a classic tactic of othering, isn't it? Taking something unfamiliar, maybe complex, and twisting it into something scandalous to discredit a whole group.
It really makes you wonder how much of history, especially religious history, is shaped not just by events, but by reputation and rumor, deliberate misrepresentation.
It absolutely does. And it's crucial to unpack this accusation because the reality was almost certainly far more complex than just simple libertinism or promiscuity.
Okay, so what might have been really going on?
Well, the charge likely masked various practices rooted in very different social and economic realities. For example, we find some evidence, particularly in Bactria and parts of eastern Iran, of fraternal polyandry.
Brothers sharing a wife.
Yes, and this seems often linked to preserving family property, preventing it from being fragmented generation after generation.
Okay, practical reasons then. And what about voda?
Right. The traditional Zoroastrian practice of marriage between close relatives, cousins, sometimes closer. This was also deeply linked to property, preserving lineage, and even seen as having religious merit in Zoroastrianism.
But Muslims found it abhorrent.
They viewed it with revulsion, yeah, and often distorted it in their writings into claims of generalized, uncontrolled incest, which weren't the case.
Okay, what else might be behind the rumors?
Well, we also see concepts that might maybe resonate with ideas like transgressive sacrality that you find in some branches of Tantric Buddhism and Hinduism,
How so?
where ritual sexual intercourse, sometimes even with close relatives, was practiced in very specific contexts to overcome dualities, break taboos, and achieve a kind of sudden enlightenment. This might be what underlies some of those hostile descriptions of ritual meals followed by sexual union. Among certain groups, a deeply ritualized act, perhaps, not just a free-for-all.
Fascinating. Any other possibilities?
Other practices could have been distorted. Maybe instances where a man might lend his wife or daughter for specific purposes, like siring offspring for another man, sometimes maybe for financial gain, distinct from casual promiscuity.
Okay.
There are also some historical accounts, maybe less reliable, of guest prostitution, where women engaged in sexual relations with foreigners, sometimes with their husband's knowledge. Again, easily misconstrued by outsiders.
And finally, this light-extinguishing feast idea.
Yeah, that's a really infamous trope. It was a recurring accusation lobbed against all sorts of secretive, antinomian sects throughout history, not just these groups.
So, likely baseless.
Almost always a baseless rumor. It basically equated any deviation from mainstream religious law with complete sexual license. It highlights how polemic and fear, more than fact, often shaped perceptions and demonized groups seen as outsiders.
So we've explored these controversial accusations, tried to understand the complex realities possibly behind them. But it begs a larger question. Do these ancient ideas, these powerful beliefs, just vanish into history? Or do they actually echo into our present day? What does this all mean for today?
It's astonishing how deeply some of these ideas seem to resonate, actually. Let's look at the enduring legacies. Quramism, for instance, is often connected by scholars to Mazdakism.
Right, Mazdak from earlier Sasanian times.
Exactly. And Mazdakism is one of the few historical examples we have of what you might call pre-modern communism.
Yes, and communists in a very literal sense, right? Sharing property and women.
That's the claim, yes. Not just sharing the proceeds or everyone renouncing property, but the communal holding of the land itself, and apparently wives, too. That's quite distinct from most other historical communal movements, making it a really unique and radical vision for its time.
Okay, where else do we see these Iranian ideas popping up?
We definitely see ideas of Iranian origins surfacing pretty early in Shi'ism, particularly in what are often called extremist or 𝙃𝙃 sects.
The 𝙃𝙃. What kind of ideas?
Well, these 𝙃𝙃 groups really pushed the boundaries of orthodoxy by deifying the imams, believing they were divine manifestations.
Like Hulul again.
Exactly, and believing in Raja, the return, or even the reincarnation of spirits, especially the spirits of the imams. The very idea that you find in some Shi's thought of superhuman imams who literally hold the cosmos together, that speaks volumes about this influence from the Iranian thought world. These ideas blended, sometimes controversially, into new theological frameworks.
And Sufism. Did these ideas find a home there, too?
Oh, absolutely. Sufism arguably provided a particularly comfortable home for many of these Iranian concepts, maybe in a more metaphorical or spiritualized form.
How so?
Well, Take the Sufi belief in divine immanence, the idea that nothing but God exists, that the divine is literally everywhere, even in rocks, as some Sufis would say. That aligns remarkably well with the Karami view of God as a pervasive light, often hidden by veils, physical forms, bodies, the material world. It's a fundamental concept of divine immanence connecting these traditions across centuries.
And what about challenging rituals?
That too. This extends sometimes to antinomian tendencies. Some Sufis, not all by any means, sometimes transcended ritual worship, saying things like, truth lies within, why bother with the mosque?
Right.
That echoes the Karami rejection of external religious law, suggesting that true spiritual connection wasn't necessarily found in outward ritual, but inner experience.
And sometimes they took it even further.
There were rare but documented Sufi groups who apparently justified forbidden acts, theft, wine, sex, using this logic that a friend, meaning God, does not withhold his property from his friend.
Wow.
They sometimes viewed women, for instance, as basil sprigs that they were free to smell. It's an extreme interpretation of divine unity, leading to a pretty radical disregard for conventional social norms.
And finally, these ancient ideas aren't just stuck in history books. They have actual modern echoes.
They really do. Groups like the 𝙀𝙧𝙬𝙀 or Yarsan and the Yazidis, found today in parts of modern Iraq, Iran, Armenia, Anatolia. They continue to hold beliefs in divine incarnation and reincarnation in vast cyclical time.
Still practicing today?
Yes.
Yeah.
They represent living traditions reflecting the deep, persistent roots of these ancient Iranian ideas, stretching right from antiquity into our contemporary world. It's quite remarkable.
So we've gone on quite a journey through this really turbulent period, uncovering these fascinating beliefs and struggles that shaped early Islamic Iran. What truly stands out to me after this discussion is how these deep dives always seem to reveal surprising continuities and transformations, of course, of religious and social ideas across centuries and cultures, the incredible mess of information, the conflicting reports about these revolts and beliefs. When we unpack it, it shows us not just chaos, but this really complex tapestry of human adaptation, resistance, and spiritual searching.
Absolutely. And understanding these historical movements isn't just about the past, is it? It helps us appreciate the fluidity of religious belief, the profound impact conquest can have on identity, and how old ideas constantly find new forms in changing societies, even today.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. If the divine can manifest in different forms across history, and if spirits can potentially journey through many lives, what does this suggest about the very boundaries we draw between the human and the divine? And maybe even the true meaning of continuous creation in our own world.
Definitely something to chew on.